Hi, all. I'm Nick North, a big boy with big feelings, and today I am going to be debuting a new show called Bracket Breakdown. I have planned on kind of doing this for a while because I have a big love for everything tournament related. I love single elimination, I love everything like that. And before we get into what today's video is about, I would just like to say sorry for the long hiatus. With how big this project is, I think you'll be able to see why I've been gone so long, but this has also been a huge passion project for me. It's taken a long time, and I'm really excited to show off what I have. I decided to take a massive undertaking. I'm not sure if you know this, but Power Rangers has 30 seasons, and Super Sentai has 46 seasons. And I have decided to do the insane thing of making a tournament based on every single, that I could find, monster design from either of the shows. And looking at them from a design standpoint to see in one-by-one eliminations which design I feel is the best that Power Rangers or Super Sentai has ever had. Now then, let's set the parameters, let's understand what we're all talking about, all of that good stuff. This list will cover all currently completed seasons from the franchise. So we have everything from Go-Ranger to King-Ogre from the Super Sentai side. Like I said, that's 45 seasons, so this will be a long project, but I think it'll be fun. And from the Power Ranger standpoint, it will be everything from Mighty Morphin all the way to Cosmic Fury, which has recently ended. I figure now's a good time to look at stuff like this because we had the 45th season of Super Sentai, and Power Rangers is going to be having a kind of weird break for a hot second while they figure out what to do with the property now that it's in Hasbro's hands. Currently, in Super Sentai land, otherwise known as Japan, Go-Onger is currently debuting, but I won't have any monsters from there because it's not a completed season yet. It just wouldn't be fair to look at all of those designs and kind of try to do it halfway. So, with that being said, left over, there are a startling 2,407 monsters I was able to find. So this tournament will be completed in 10 rounds just because of the number of it. With about 24 parts in terms of videos, I'm going to try my best to do a good 100 monsters per video. I think that's a good amount of time to kind of cut it up. And then near the end, I'll probably have bigger, longer compilations with everything in it if people are interested in that. So, a few lists of disclaimers. This will be looking at villains of the franchise, so there won't be any, like, Zords, any helper creatures that have been good. Sometimes there will be a villain of the week that kind of turned good for the episode or something, but for the most part, it's still kind of part of that villain organization. It's still part of the villain of the week trope that they kind of have in Super Sentai. And the list of villains and most of the resources were found via the Power Rangers fandom wiki. It has a lot of the source images that I'll be using for this, so shout out to them and all of the good work they do. I did my best to make sure that there were no duplicates because if you're not aware, which, I would assume you are, but who knows? The Power Rangers franchise is adapted from the Super Sentai franchise. So a lot of the monsters, a lot of the characters have been adapted from the original Japanese show and turned into more of an American-fitting audience with their names changed and everything like that. So the name that I will be going with for most of the monsters will be their original Japanese name, except in certain cases where either A, there is no Super Sentai counterpart in the case of Lord Zed, or B, their Power Rangers counterpart is so intrinsically linked to that name that it would be hard to know who I'm talking about if I don't use that name, such as Rita Repulsa. I don't think that most people have a super good name recollection with the monsters of the week from Power Rangers, so I didn't worry about that. I'm just going to use it by their original Japanese names, which, as always, because it's in full Japanese, please forgive any mispronunciations I have. With that said, some of the images found on the wiki are just screenshots from the original Japanese show, which is the best quality images that we have available of the source villain or the episode that they're from. So for some of them, you may be thinking, oh, that's a really grainy image, or oh, that's not like a full body image, or whatever. For those, I did try to use any sort of image search that I had available to me to kind of cross-reference and see the whole body design. But in cases where that wasn't available, I just kind of made the decision based on what I had. The last thing that I would like to touch on is that sometimes, as is the case in superhero shows, a bad guy will decide to turn into a good guy or vice versa. And they will have switched sides to help the Rangers or be a Power Ranger themselves. And the main line that I've drawn here is that they will be included if A, they don't become Rangers, and B, the villain form is different from their Ranger form in some explicable way. So for Tommy Oliver, for example, he will not be included in this list because when he was a bad guy, he was still the Green Ranger, and so that will not be included. But in the case of Ruki or Zenaku, and who turned into, Merrick and eventually became the Lunar Wolf Ranger, then he will be included because Zenaku, or Ryuki as he is called in the Super Sentai version, is a completely separate design. Very different. In addition, I will do my best to make a summary of defeated individuals per round, not per video, so there won't be a summary at the end of this video, but at the end of entirety of round 1, I will have an updated list of everyone. And then at the end of this video, I will have a kind of breakdown of who is in the tournament overall. In terms of that kind of org chart, or a way to visualize who all I'm talking about, they will be split into the many, many, many factions of Super Sentai to the best of my abilities, just for readability and just for ease of use in terms of the multi-round structure. I think that's the best way to do it, and it'll kind of have a good way to see the design inspirations on kind of a grand scale per season. In addition, talking about factions, last thing, I promise, the different factions of Power Rangers are very important to understanding some of the design philosophy. I think for a lot of the first round matches, that design philosophy doesn't super come into play into the decision making. And because we've already got to get through 1,200 and some change monsters in the first round, I am choosing to cover a lot of those factions in rounds 2 and 3. Once we have a much narrower kind of group of people, we can actually discuss what the theme is here. And I think you'll thank me once you realize how many of these people there are. So, with that said, let's begin round 1, part 1, video 1, which will cover the monsters who placed 2406 to 2306. So, for our very first match, we have Jan, not the Drag Race one, and Herlock Sholmes, not the Phoenix Wright one. So for our very first match, we have a relative landslide, which I think will kind of illustrate some of the ease that comes around with round 1, because there are just so many that have come through the series, and not all of them are going to be very spectacular. Jen is your run-of-the-mill space monster. The only really interesting thing about it is that it used to be one monster and then got split into 2. Its counterpart we will be seeing later in the series, as well as its combined form. And then we have Herlock Sholmes, which, as opposed to just being a regular monster, he is a fox-themed detective. And overall, just a much more appealing design. I love the way that the ears kind of come up to make that classic Sherlock Holmes-esque hat. And I just overall think that his design is much more appealing. So the winner will be Herlock. For round 2, we have Pollution President Babachid and Robogog of the Tensai. And both of these are pretty big in terms of lore. Both of these are leaders of a faction. But because this series is about design, not character, that won't really be included. So I easily have to give it to Robogog for having a much more streamlined design. Babachi just has way too much going on, and it doesn't really all work. For match 3, we have Locomotive Mask versus Yokai Odoroshi. Now, I must say, I'm not the biggest fan of the Oni look, where they're kind of cross-eyed, but the overall design of Odoroshi is still very much winning over the very basic design of Locomotive Mask. Locomotive Mask is from the first season of Monsters, and some of them have cool enough design aspects to still be effective, but Locomotive Mask is not one of them. For match 4, we have Kamajim Unka versus Hades Beast Fungus. And don't get me wrong, I actually really liked the design of the Hades Beast Fungus. It has really cool concepts and execution, but I'm a huge fan of the way that Kamajim Unka uses its design inspiration of being a stink bug mixed with a kind of nobleman. I think it's slightly more effective and also slightly more unique compared to some of the other kind of design inspirations that we end up seeing in Power Rangers. For match 5, we have Bear Mozu versus Salome. And where the last match had 2 good designs, these are both pretty mid. Salome is just a human woman, and I love that for her, but she still somehow beats out the Bear Mozu because it doesn't look that much like a bear, and the Mozus are meant to be like beast machine fusions, but this design just isn't doing anything interesting for me, and so Salome will be taking the win. For match 6, we have Yokuba Banger of the Electric Shock versus Baseball Monger, and for a round 1 match, Yokuba Banger is impressive enough to be a landslide over Baseball Monger, whose rounded face and body, without looking like its inspiration, is not enough from a design standpoint. For match 7, I'm going to be real with you. I hate the way that Vacuum Cleaner Org looks. There's just something about it that really rubs me the wrong way. And Sprayloid 2, while not being my favorite design, is at least not as bad as that. So it's going to take the W. Almost basically by forfeit. For match 8, we have Tyranno Television versus Corrupt Medicine Doctor. 2 factors are going on here. Normally, it's just a robot kind of designs are my least favorite. So that puts Corrupted Medicine Doctor at kind of a disadvantage. And B, Tyranno Television is just so damn camp. It's just so silly. It's the kind of thing that you would only see on Power Rangers, and that's why it's getting the win for me. For match 9, we have Scorpius versus Yadigar Gohome. And many of you probably recognize Scorpius from the Lost Galaxy series. I think he's a good character, but I cannot stress enough to you that this is a design competition, and the design for him is simply some pincers and legs coming out of a rock. Meanwhile, Yadigar has a much more complex and appealing design despite the stupid little skull at the top of his head. So he will be moving on to the next round. For match 10, we have Uchuki versus Dodomeki Minosaur. This one is pretty close. I like both designs, but Uchuki is going to edge out just barely because I enjoy the kind of constellation design and the space rings. Dodomeki Minosaur is very good, but it's just not enough for this round, unfortunately. For match 11, we have Kraken Minosaur versus Sakalar. And for this one, Kraken Minosaur is the hands-down winner. I really like the design. I think the take on Kraken is kind of inspired in a way that isn't super traditional. I think it's looking at it from a different perspective, and I really like that. Sakalar is supposed to be a soccer ball / lizard, but it's not executed as well as I would have liked, and I think a trend you'll see is that any of the monsters ending with Lar kind of don't really do much. They're all from the same season, and that season just doesn't really deliver in terms of design as much as I would want. For match 12, we have the Snail Monster versus the Lemurian Mythical Beast. Snail Monster isn't bad, necessarily, but at its best, it only has a cool arm and a head. And although the Lemurian Mythical Beast looks like a knockoff of the Blue Eyes White Dragon, it is at least a fully realized concept, and it has something interesting to look at from top to bottom, so it will be getting the win. For match 13, we have Escape versus Centipede Nezire. In the history of Super Sentai, there are a lot of really cool centipede monsters, one of which will be coming up in this batch later. But unfortunately, this is not one of them, and it's kind of a shame because a lot of the Nezires are pretty good takes on their concept, but Centipede Nezire just doesn't do it. And Escape not only has a great design, but has 3 separate great designs, and so this was an easy win for her. Match 14 is the Nauman Monster versus Nupefuhofu. And Nauman Monster is based off of a woolly mammoth relative, which I didn't know what a Nauman was, and apparently that's what it is. So I love that. And it would be cool by itself. Like in a vacuum, it's a pretty serviceable monster design, but it is up against a really effective and even pretty scary looking monster in Nupefuhofu, who is going to take the win because of just how grotesque and kind of body horror it is, while also still having that fun little camp lantern face deal going on. For match 15, we have Trakina versus Regeneration Brain. And unfortunately, this is one of those cases where whatever the design concept of Regeneration Brain is, it's not coming through because of the image quality, which is a real shame, but either way, Trakina has a pretty good design and even has 2 separate pretty cool designs. So she will be our winner, and she will also survive longer than her dear daddy, Scorpius. For match 16, we have Grubmonger versus Noodle Dimension, which is a sentence I bet no one has ever said in their entire life besides me. Grubmonger is just disgusting from a color and design standpoint. I get that the inspiration is meant to be something a little bit more disgusting, but Noodle Dimension is easily going to win this. It's not the most glorious win, don't get me wrong, but it's a win. For match 17, we have Yokai Nekomata versus Witch Mask. And Witch Mask isn't bad per se, but it doesn't really give, like, witch to me. And meanwhile, Nekomata has cool cultural inspirations, as well as being based off of a wristwatch, as well as the kind of yokai that it's coming from, and just being a general better design. Overall, there's a lot more for your eyes to do and appreciate with Yokai Nekomata, so it will be winning. Match 18 is going to be Morris and Yoindiver versus Sumasulinian Nikaradar. And that is a lot for my tongue to be able to handle. This is a closer match than some of them have been. I think both of them have something going for them, but Morisun Yoindiver is one of multiple monsters with a similar kind of design from a similar season, and this one just isn't spectacular enough to beat Nika Radar's cool, like, alien squid concept. So Nika Radar will be moving on to the next round. For match 19, we have Bara King versus Crescent Moon Mask. And just to get it out of the way, as much as I would love for all of the Bara monsters to be like these big, buff men that I love so much, unfortunately, Bara is a shortening of Baranoia, which is the name of kind of the machine empire that runs them. And so don't expect any hot muscle men, only robots. Sorry. But for this one, we have Bara King versus Crescent Moon Mask. And this king isn't really giving king vibes, especially from a season that actually has a whole monarchy of robots that look cooler than him. So Crescent Moon Mask is actually a really great example of what I was talking about earlier with the first season monster designs. and how some of them are still very effective because of how clean they are and how well they understood costume design. So Crescent Moon Mask is going to move on in this case. For match 20, we have Kugetsukai versus Lieutenant Colonel Gara. Gara is another in a long line of it's just a guy in clothes. So he obviously loses. I'm just going to put that out there right now. But I do just want to highlight how amazing Kugetsukai's design is. The idea of a slug using a human skeleton as a puppet is so, like, twisted and cool, and it's just so well executed. And I think that's something that you can come to expect from this specific season of designs, is that there's a lot of, like, really cool body horror stuff going on. There's really interesting takes on just the way that the human body interacts with different animals and objects. It's very interesting, and I think Kugetsukai is a great introduction to that. For match 21, we have Fly Mozu versus Boku Denien Bisques. This is a good example of, like, how to use an animal to inform design, because Bisques is fish-inspired, and obviously Fly Mozu is fly-inspired, but Bisques has a lot of those elements kind of wrapped up in it in a way that's really interesting to look at and kind of create something new, whereas Fly Mozu is quite literally just a fly. And for those reasons, Bisques is the winner. For match 22, we have Tenkaonian Raja Numanen versus Camera Mask. Numanen almost had me for a second because its mask is cool. But Camera Mask, despite being a more simple design, is much more well executed with the film wrap and the sleek black design that really works well with the camera concept. And the sleek black design of the bodysuit with the cool mask itself will bring Camera Mask to the next round, even though Namunin isn't bad per se. Match 23 is going to be House Dimension versus Yamimaru. And Yamimaru is going to win this matchup just strictly based on design. But I want to talk about House Dimension for a second because I feel like it's a lot better of a design when considered in the context of the show. It possesses houses, or at least takes the form of a house to attack its victims, and that's such a cool concept, but it doesn't really come through in the design of the monster, at least from what I can tell from the images that I have available to me, so Yamimaru will be moving on. For match 24, we have Spectral Empress Ilias versus the Black Lion Rio, otherwise known as Daishi if you're more used to the Power Rangers version. Ilias is really cool. The Egyptian design, she has some of the monster masks from her season, and in general may have made it to the second round against some of the other losers that we kicked out earlier. However, the way the cookie crumbles in a 1v1 elimination bracket is that she had to go up against Ryu. I must admit, the Confrontation Beasts have some of the best designs in the series, in my opinion, and Rio is no exception. His Black Lion form is so fucking cool with its gold accents, and the Griffin form is just an amazing evolution of that. Rio moves on, obviously. I'm so sorry, Ilias, but that's the only choice that would make sense. Match 25 is going to be Wandering Boma Yamimaru, who is different from the Yamimaru from earlier, versus Iron Spider Mask. Don't get me wrong, I like the way that Iron Spider Mask reminds me of the special Spider-Man Pop-Tarts, but the actual mask is what ruins it for me. Whereas Wandering Boma Yamimaru is admittedly just a guy in clothes, but his outfit is clean and simple, which, against a hot mess, is enough to win the round. For match 26, we have Norg versus Fork Mask. And I have such a soft spot for Norg as a character, being this, like, bumbly yeti. And so, even though that didn't, like, win the round for him, I'm not gonna lie, I love that he got matched up against Fork Mask, who isn't the worst design, but of all things to make a creature, a fork just isn't doing it, and so I'm very happy to say that Norg will be moving on to the next round, based only on design alone, but I do have a soft spot for the guy. Match 27 is going to be Igitsune versus Star King Bazu. I normally really like the design of the Gadoshu monsters, but Isagitsune just doesn't do it for me. And when compared to Star King Bazu, this kind of haunting remnant with only some organs and wires, it's a loss. Bazu is going to move on for this one. For match 28, we have the Grodius Canth versus Angular. And neither of them are particularly interesting to me, I'm not going to lie. But Angular gets the win strictly because it's not just a generic robot. For match 29, we have Gildian Gildos versus Bajillionaire. And for me, this one simply comes down to a full design. I respect the goal of Bajillionaire being like a businesswoman mixed with a squid, but there just isn't enough unique design for me. I don't quite love Gildian's look, but it feels more complete, so he will be getting the win. Match 30 is going to be Prince Sprocket versus Dora Narcissus. I like all of the Machine Empire well enough, or the Baranoia Empire, depending on which version you're talking about. But Sprocket has to be the worst of them, basically just being a blue baby. And it simply can't compete with the full design story of Narcissus, who goes from top to toe in just a completely cool interpretation of a flower. For match 31, it is going to be Tesla versus the Western Ashu tribe, King Oga. And we have a clash of clans here because we have Tesla from the Machine Empire, which is a reused suit from a different show in the same genre called Bee Fighter Kabuto. And on the other side, we have King Oga, who is from the Ashu tribe of cat people. And in my honest opinion, he does his design the worst out of any of them, which is really unfortunate because of how good his contemporaries are. But the win will be going to Tesla because of the sleek, white design and the interesting face masks. For match 32, we have Ninpuki versus the Depirus. And this one is pretty easy, but there are some things I would like to point out about the series. At a certain point in the more recent seasons, you see the same bodysuits being used for multiple monsters, with just a head difference for the most part. I'm not really sure why this happened. It may have been COVID restrictions, it may have been funding issues, I don't know. But Ninpuki is one of these. For the most part, for the first round, their head design might be enough to get them past, but eventually, depending on the series and how well that bodysuit works with the different masks, they won't fare super well because of the total look as a whole, and if it's cohesive or not. And sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. Also, a trend I've noticed is that the era around the monsters with the in front of it, or anything ending in Dogler, the design is normally not very successful. So even though he's doing the least, I will be giving this one to Ninpuki. Match 33 is going to be Actor Boma versus King BB. This one is pretty close. I do like the design of Actor Boma, but King BB is this really cool take on physiology, and the use of eyes is really cool to me. So for this round, he'll be moving on. Match 34 is going to be Komarujin versus Condor Mozu. These are both pretty serviceable, but for me, the Condor Mozu does a better job of color balance. It's not groundbreaking or anything, like a lot of the Mozus aren't, but Komarujin's flesh-colored body is kind of a no for me, so it'll go to Condor Mozu, basically as a loss for Komarujin more than a win for him. Match 35 is going to be Assaulter Borg versus HH Washoishoi. These are actually both from Power Ranger shows that I watched somewhat recently because I recently did a whole watch through of them, of every season. And the one thing that struck me the most during my whole time with Turbo, the show that HH Washoishoi got adapted into, is that I just hate the villain designs almost completely, and HH Washoishoi is no exception. Assaulter Borg isn't doing the most cool things in the world, but I definitely like it better, so he will be moving on. For match 36, we have Maneki Neko J-Men versus Rhino Mozu. And this one is another race to the bottom. Maneki Neko barely wins because he has a more interesting concept. Rhinos have been done way better on Power Ranger shows for both the villains and the good guys. And so Rhino Mozu isn't going to get a pass because he's just a rhino. That's not good enough, unfortunately. And although, like I said, Maneki Neko Jamin is not that great to me either, he will be moving on. For match 37, we have Thousanian Ganeka versus spiritual filmmaker Glokun. And Ganeka has things about the design that I like, but overall it's very simplistic and without a ton of artistic direction. Meanwhile, Glokun is doing what Power Rangers does as its very best, which is to take something mundane like a director and kind of their traditional outfit and making an artistic conceptual design out of it. And that's not even counting like the storyline that will inevitably go with that, the cool concepts that go with that. But even just on design alone, Glokun is the winner. For match 38, we have Hades, Beastman, King of Hell, Samurai, Shichijuro versus Study Monster. And there is as much of a difference in name length as there is in quality of design. I think it's relatively self-explanatory why Shichijuro is the obvious winner. For match 39, we have Invisible World versus Media Suyoin Diver. And I normally don't like the outfits of the world monsters, but I really like the Invisible Man concept, and I think the suit is working really well with the head in this case. Like I said, sometimes the same costume, different head style does work, and this is one of those that is a great example. I'm just going to call him Media's design is fine. I like it well enough, but it's the same basic idea as Moray, the Suyu Endeavor, who we saw earlier, where it's the same basic idea, whereas Invisible World has a unique enough concept that he gets the win for me in this match. For match 40, we have Sniper Reiho versus the Garagos. And Sniper Reiho has a pretty cool plant design, and I actually like the Garagos, but it's like the weird hair that does it for me, that takes it out. So Sniper Reiho takes the win, albeit barely. For match 41, we have Scorpion Monger versus Unicorn Minosaur. And Scorpion Monger is one of the better Mongers from that season, but I was a huge fan of the Unicorn Minosaur when I first saw it on Dino Fury. And it kind of indicated to me the quality of designs of the Minosaurs in general. And so he will be getting the win because I've just always been a fan of his design. And honestly, depending on the season, the worst of the designs can sometimes beat the best of designs from other seasons. And that's just how it goes. For match 42, we have Perfume Ninja Kira Cologne, which does sound like a drag name, and we're versus Highness Duke Org Resetsu. Kira Cologne actually has some good things going for her, but Resetsu is part of this trio of monsters, orgs specifically, that are based off of the major facial parts. In this case, it's the mouth, and I think that has really cool concepts. I also love that in the Japanese version, they kind of have this cool gimmick where sometimes it's a male voice, sometimes it's a female voice, sometimes it's both. Just very cool design overall. I love the use of the mouths on Resetsu. Match 43 is going to be Fushibachi Tengai versus Chochinlar. And as you'll quickly figure out, and as I've stated before, I'm normally not the biggest fan of the Lar monsters, but at least Chochinlar is giving us something, and it's pretty decently executed for what it is. To Tengai's credit, he at one point transforms into another villain, but that design is someone else's design, and you got to give us something cool to look at in the meantime. So the win will be going to Chochinlar. Match 44 is going to be Rose Nezare versus Glovin. Rose Nezare has a really fun design. I don't super understand the blue parts of it, but it has a lot to enjoy about it. Glovin isn't bad, but a baseball monster has to do more than that to stand out, especially because of the context it was released in. It's from one of the more recent seasons. There have been many baseball monsters before, and it's just not doing as much as I need it to, so Rose Nezare will be winning. Match 45 is going to be Rhino Nezare versus Hyde Monster. And on paper, This should have been a huge win for Hyde Monster. He's based off of the Xenomorphs, and he is referencing Jekyll and Hyde, and then you see his design, and it's just this. Win goes to Rhino Nezare. For match 46, we have Hitomi Dama versus the Gunjoji brothers. And Hitomi Dama is part of the Ayakashi or the Gadoshu. They're similar. One of my favorite factions, mostly because of their interesting takes on human form, as I said with Kugotsukai. This, however, isn't doing it for me. It's kind of giving me the ick, if I'm being honest. And Gunjoji has a really cool, like, chess-themed design, and that will be getting the win for me. Match 47 is going to be Clockmask versus Narisumashi. And talk about mountains versus molehills. Narisumashi has such a cool and interesting and colorful design that I will be delving deep into in later rounds because I just love it so much. And Clockmask, honestly, compared, never had a chance. Narisumashi gets the win in a landslide. Match 48 is going to be Wingmask versus Disaster Ninja Kang Roulette. I like how Wingmask looks like that one item from Smash Bros. That has like the big red cross that goes across the whole screen. But it's just not enough. I mean, if we take away the mask portion, there's really nothing to look at besides just a black costume. And it's just kind of boring. Kang Roulette is kind of wacky, but for round 1, I like it, and it's definitely enough versus Wingmask. For match 49, we have Poseidon Org versus Bara Fraud. Poseidon Org has a really cool concept and design follow-through, obviously harkening back to one of the great Greek gods. Whereas Bara Fraud is a reference to a series of movies in Japan that I don't know, which I love. I love that gets a reference, and I love learning about new things. But design-wise, it just isn't enough for me. Match 50 is going to be Balm Tree Boma versus Shizuka of the Wind. Shizuka isn't the best design I've ever seen, but it beats out the Palm Tree Boma very slightly. Because I do like what the Palm Tree Boma is doing and has going on, but the metallic blue of Shizuka is very fitting and overall just goes better with the design. So Shizuka will be moving on. Match 51 is going to be Laserhawk versus Mushroom Nezare. Mushroom Nezare has a much more interesting design overall, and so the win will be going to him, but I do appreciate the way that Laserhawk and his contemporaries remind me of old Mega Man allies, specifically from the Mega Man X games. Match 52 is going to be Kyukuyuki versus Chibuchi and Butchie. This is an interesting one because I think, full disclosure, Butchie is hideous. But at the same time, that's kind of what they were going for with him. That was kind of the design inspiration. They wanted to make something that was hard to look at. Meanwhile, Kyukuyuki is a reference to what eventually got turned into Lightspeed Rescue from Power Rangers, and he's supposed to be a firefighter, but the design doesn't do that justice. I'm not getting firefighter. I'm not getting really anything from him. So I'm going to give it to Butchie for at least delivering on his design concept. For match 53, we have Devil Athletic versus Straw Bankai. And despite being confusingly named, Devil Athletic is based off of an Oni, not an athlete. And Straw Bankai is obviously notably based on straws. And what's going to give Devil Athletic the win for me is that Straw Bankai's face is fucking horrible. I hate it. I hate it so much. I went back and forth a lot between these two, but ultimately I like Devil Athletic better because it just has less negative marks for me. For match 54, we have Shieldon versus Crab Mozu. And the Mozu are all like incredibly campy takes on animals. And sometimes I love that, and sometimes it just looks very goofy without really having design. And unfortunately, in this case, it lands on the latter, especially when compared to Shieldon, who executes on the sci-fi theming of his season very well, and like takes it very seriously, which in this case will give Shieldon the win because it looks like he just put more effort into his design. For match 55, we have Machine Monger versus Kugutsu Dayu. Machine Monger is like the most basic of the basic. There is zero interesting about this design, and he's up against a starfish ninja with awesome colors. Do I even need to say it? Kagutsu Dayu wins, obviously. For match 56, we have Nararian versus Arazinlar. Nararian looks like Jabba the Hutt if he pulled like a Voldemort-style back of the head possession, and it's very disturbing to me, I'll be real. And Arazinlar is just a teapot guy, and he doesn't even do that well. So the win very easily goes to Nararian. For match 57, we have Bagil Dogler versus Excavation Sima Beast Molgul. Bagel Dogler is actually not that bad of a design, especially amongst the Doglers, who we haven't had a ton of, but they're bad. Let me just tell you that right now. But Molgul has really good patterning, reminiscent of sand and striations, as well as a non-traditional body shape that I can really get behind, which will earn him the W. For match 58, we have Poison Gas Brain versus Capri. Capri, or Wendinu in the original, has a relatively simple but effective design with subtle snake theming, and compared to Poisonous Gas Brain, which is a cautionary tale in maximalist design, it's muddled, it's nonsensical. Capri wins with a pretty pink glare. For match 59, we have Bara Baby versus Cicada Evo. And is Cicada Evo doing anything memorable or remarkable besides being a green cicada monster? No, of course not. It's not. But is Bara Baby a disgusting abomination of a monster with almost nothing I like about it? Yes. So, the win will go to Cicada Evo for not pissing me off. For round 60, we have Sniper Cat versus Hell Painting Boma. And in a few ways, I feel like the Bomas walked so that the Ayakashi could run. And I think Hell Painting Boma is a great example of this. It has a hellish design, it has fun use of the human body. And, while I like Sniper Cat, it's a little too rough around the edges, specifically at its scope area and some of the spots where the metal meets the cat parts. They could have done much better with what they had at the time. So the winner will be Hell Painting Boma. For match 61, we have the Cicada Killer Monster versus Lupaloid. So the name means that he is a killer cicada monster, not that he kills cicadas and that's why he's a monster. Regardless, Lupaloid has a much more interesting design and inspiration, which, in case it's not obvious, it's a magnifying glass, but more than that, it's kind of like a detective kind of theme, leading to an easy win, and you don't need a magnifying glass to see why. For match 62, we have Kuwagataloid versus Jamotsu. And I must say up front, I'm a big fan of beetles. I recently got the Megazord from King Ogre that has a giant beetle as its main body, and I just love it so much. So Kuwagataloid already has that going for it. But more importantly, Jamotsu has things going on, but it's unclear what the concept is or the inspiration. The wiki at various points says he can make sand dolls, which are dolls made of sand, not the footwear. He's a marionette alien, and that he is based off of Atlantean statues. But none of those really come through. It's not clear which of those were his main inspiration, if any of them. And although it's definitely possible to have multiple motifs at once, this guy feels like he doesn't even have one that was done successfully, let alone multiple. So Kuwagataloid will be winning for me. Match 63 is going to be between Confrontation Beast, Tortoise Fist Mecha versus Lizard Nezalar. Another trend you'll quickly pick up on is my love for the Confrontation Beasts. I touched a little bit on it with Rio, but I just think that they're so well done. Mecha has a very cool color scheme with the red and the blue, and its design is just really well done. And don't get me wrong, so does Lizard Nezalar, which when it's this close, it leads me to be nitpicky looking at the really small details, especially and specifically the eyes on Lizard Nezalar don't really work for me. And it's a shame because I really love the frilled lizard design, but it just can't beat the tortoise in this case. Match 64, we have Bara Keka versus Dullahan Minosaur. Bara Keka is based off of a naval commander or king of playing cards, although, to be honest, he resembles the Nutcracker more to me than either of those. But either way, not a bad design. But if we look at his competition of Dullahan Minosaur, who has this cool way of referencing the myth, which, if you're not aware, is the Headless Horseman. That's another word for it. He doesn't have a traditional head. He kind of has like those spooky will-o-wisp vibes that also go with that same myth. And he's very much going to take the win for this match because I think his theming and references are much better than Bara Keka's. Match 65, Gardnoid Gash versus Wogarajim. I really like the gyms because they're all like insectozoid monsters, but this one is based off of a mole cricket, which is not my favorite. I think besides the head, it's just kind of like a minor, which is fine, but Gash is just a smidge more better designed. Like, yes, for the most part, he's just a regular robot guy, but it's done really neatly in a way that I enjoy. And there are little design aspects like the face on his chest and the different colored eyes that like barely edge him out for me on this one. Sorry, Wogarajim. I love your people, but not you. For match 66, we have Pot Taoist versus Infernal Dark Hellbeast, which is the edgiest name in the world, probably. Infernal Dark Hellbeast has a lot going for it. The color concept, the non-traditional design, they're both very cool. But the bottom half is the only thing I really like about it. The more you get to the top half, it's pretty basic. Meanwhile, Pot Taoist is pretty interesting. He reminds me of the Jar of Greed from Yu-Gi-Oh! And overall, he's just got some zest to him, something interesting. And in competitions like this, where I'm looking at so many monsters, I really prefer that. For match 67, we have Titarnian Mediasol versus Anbu Obake. Mediasol is based off of a flaming astronaut, which is great. I love that concept for the kind of sci-fi season that SPD is going for. And I cannot tell you, I would have loved to make a joke about like a gay astronaut and make some little reference. But fun fact I learned while doing this, there are no out gay astronauts. Which is a bummer. Even the ones that have been to space already and don't have to risk their career have not come out as gay, which sucks. So that is the new frontier that all of us gays need to go for, is space. Anbu Obake is cool. It kind of has like an Oogie Boogie vibe, but it's a little too simple to win. I think Oogie Boogie is actually a great concept of the kind of changes I would make to make this design work. Make it a little bit more patchwork, make it a little bit cooler. And so the win is going to go to Mediasol for, in my opinion, being the first gay astronaut. For match 68, we have Magodapone versus Galactic Empress Meadow. And Magodapone is a recolorized version of another monster. And both are done great, don't get me wrong. But Empress Meadow simply is that girl. She's a disembodied head with rainbow hair, and that would be enough to get the W regardless. But she also has several other looks, all of which are pretty successful. Match 69. Nice. Dogun versus 03. Dogun is a cool Dogu/clock-based monster scientist, and 03 is part of a series of spies that were kind of, I believe, the very first, like, evil Sentai, quote-unquote, even though they were just differently colored spies. But at the end of the day, she's from a really early season. She's only wearing a green bodysuit, and that's just not going to be enough to beat the level of effort and design that went into Dogun, so he's going to take the win. Match 70 is going to be Heart Monster versus Hyoga. Hyoga is a really cool black and blue cheetah man, and is up against a really conceptual Heart Monster. The things I really like about it are that it's a non-traditional take on Heart Monster. The color scheme is saying that, but there are parts that aren't really working for me, like the general face area, and it's just it's kind of a shame because I like a lot of things about it, but it's just not going to be enough to beat Hyoga, unfortunately. For match 71, we have Gilba versus Dorobozu. And Gilba is pretty cool. The balls all over design is really appealing, especially with those colors. But the dark green portions, I think, hold it back a lot. Being kind of out of place and a little gross, in my opinion. Dorobozu is a cool, like, octopus vacuum man with a very cool design all over his body with an amazing patterning, and he will be sucking up the win. Match 72 is going to be Bara Kendama versus Makuin of the Blob. Bara Kendama is based off of a ball and cup game, which, even by Power Ranger standards, is a pretty boring design inspiration, especially if you're not going to go very far with it. Meanwhile, Makuin of the Blob is basically the personification of pollution and decay that has, and it has a design that works perfectly. No notes, except a ticket to the next round, which he will be getting courtesy of me because Bara Kendama dropped the ball from the cup. Match 73 is going to be Cell Phone Org versus Bari Boru Dara of the Uniburus header. It's a real shame because I really genuinely like the Cell Phone Org. He's got a lot of cool things going for him. The red and blue of the diagonal design of the cell phones. But the Uniburus header is just next level. It has a very heavenly, angelic color scheme. It's covered in horns, which just gives the same, like, biblically accurate unicorn vibe, and has 3 heads, which all have different colored eyes, which are red, blue, and yellow, which is also kind of a reference to Power Rangers. What more could you ask for? The win goes to Bari, Boru, and Dara. Match 74 is going to be Bodyguard Hydrid versus Sela. So what we have for this round, or this match, is a lesson in readability. Bodyguard Hydrid is a samurai, but it's also supposed to be a bee stinger, which looks really clear in the concept art, but not in the actual design. Meanwhile, Sela is a merman, and looks like it, kind of having the proportions of like a DreamWorks monster kind of take on the fish boy from Hellboy. Sela gets the win, just kind of barely, but honestly, Hydrid is the one who lost this for themselves. Match 75, Hungry Monger versus Yumibakura. What even is Hungry Monger? I mean, sure, he's holding a hot dog on a stick. Fine. But other than that, there isn't a ton to suggest the name. And that would be fine, I guess, if the design itself stood alone. But when you compare it to Yumibakura, who is a cool, chimeric, otherworldly monster with an absolutely sick patterning all over it, it's kind of a shutout in this case. Yumibakura wins. Match 76, Batmonger versus Glody Leucodium, which I love saying that name every time, and it's just a great time. Batmonger is a bat with machine parts, which is great for him. I love that he gets to do that. But Glody is one of 5 kind of jesters from King Ogre. Kambajim Unka, who is mentioned earlier in this video, who's based off the stink bug, is another one of them. And they're all cool, like, bug-themed monsters. And the reason why I give the quotations is because they're actually just creepy crawlies as kind of a general category. This one specifically is based off of a flatworm parasite, which is evident not only from his arms, which look like the parasite itself, but also the parts in his suit look like they're crawling all over him and through him, which is so sick. Glody Leucodium, you get the win easily. Match 77 is going to be Rake Sima Beast Gabara versus Medusa Minosaur. Gabara is based both on of a Kappa and a minor character from Journey to the West, and Medusa Minosaur is, well, Medusa. I think it would have been easy to do kind of a standard Gorgon design with this monster, like we've seen in Power Rangers before, but it's a lot more conceptual and interesting to look at. There's kind of these cool like eyes and snakes just all over the place, which I can't say about Gabara, unfortunately, so the win will be going to Medusa. Match 78 is going to be Germalian Biz Goa versus Kabudabushin Deboff. This match basically comes down to effort and design. Biz Goa is cool looking enough. He kind of reminds me of Grey Matter from Ben 10, but Kabudabushin is the overall better design. There's just a lot more positive things to look at, and it's more detailed, more effort was put into it, and Bizgoa is just too simple to get the win, so it'll be going to Kabudabushin Deboff. Match 79 is going to be Goneshi versus Bulldozer Lloyd. And for this one, I need you to hear me out. Goneshi would be better than Bulldozer Lloyd based off of first impression alone, due to Bulldozer Lloyd's very like boxing and boring design. But also, Goneshi is based off of the Loch Ness Monster and the infamous picture of it kind of coming out of the water. And you can see that exact head shape coming out of the back of his head, and his tail of the Loch Ness Monster comes through his chin, and the kind of like ring makes like the water barrier. It's just very cool. The win will go to Ganeshi. Match 80 is going to be Hades Beastworm versus Bara Builder. Hades Beastworm is actually a multi-headed beast with the main worms coming out from like the ground, looking like multiple heads, kind of like a Hydra. Bara Builder isn't bad. I kind of like its color scheme, but it doesn't do enough to beat the worm in this case. Match 81, Mimilar versus Earthquake Sima Beast Quakeross. Let me get this out of the way. Quakeross wins. He's a cool tree guy. I love that. But let me also say he probably lucked out the most, because Mimilar might be my least favorite design ever. I don't necessarily love that he's based off of an ear. There are a few monsters that do that, and I don't really like any of them. But even beyond that, the color is disgusting looking. Like, it looks like decayed skin going up. And that's not what I want to see fighting me if I was a Power Ranger. So the winner will go to Quakeross, obviously. Match 82, Faucet Mask versus Confrontation Beast Eel Fist Nagyu. Nagyu has this really cool design with the eel aesthetic, and he's going to slide right over this strange fire hydrant man to get the win, just because he's doing a lot more. It's a lot more interesting, and Faucet Mask is just... Match 83, Hades Beast Spider versus Baruga Dogler. Hades Beast Spider is so cool. It like really takes the spider concept to 11, and it actually gives me the heebie-jeebies a bit because of just how gross it looks. Baruga Dogler, like most Doglers, is not doing that much that's really special. So Hades Beast Spider is going to move to the next round, and I hope he stays there while I do the rest of this because I don't like looking at him. Match 84 is going to be Horseshoe Crab Monger versus King Potdius. I like Horseshoe Crab Monger enough, especially the crying face kind of under his exoskeleton. But King Potdius is easily the winner in this case. He's got that sick like golden blue color design, and he's got a really nice use of geometric shapes all over, so he's going to take the win. Match 85, Bara Hungry versus Commandant Wars Gill. This one's pretty open and closed. I don't know what it is with Sentai and naming things Hunger or Hungry when it's like a cooking machine, but it's kind of boring either way. And meanwhile, Warsgill has a really sick, like, nautical pirate design, and those frills are everything. So he's going to be sailing to the win and to the next round. For match 86, we have Yokai Baku versus Cow-type All-Purpose Weapon Zero. Love these names. Love pink. It's a shame because I'm a fan of the design of Baku. I really am. It has cool colors, a cool secondary aesthetic of kind of like a cooking pot, but he's going to lose out to Cow Zero, whose use of leather material and the cool sculptural way that it has kind of like these bones and like meaty sections all throughout his midsection, like cow bones, is so cool and such a good take on cows. Match 87, Lost Highness Duke Rakushasa versus Scrozzle. I think it would be really easy to look at Scrozzle and think he's just another robot guy, but his purpose as an inventor and schemer is really evident in his design, which I think is the right way to do it with characters like that. On the other hand, Rakushasa has a really cool inspiration from this figure from Hinduism, but that inspiration doesn't come through really. And the actual design is just a purple guy with long hair. And Scrozzle's latest invention is a giant W for getting into the next round. For match 88, we have Mechanic Officer Ijirud versus Gakarize. Another one that's kind of a shame to lose so early because I really like Gakarize, but there's something about the like non-humanoid design of Ijirud, as well as the cleanness of his design that's going to inch him out just slightly, and I do mean like just slightly. He has elements of a microscope, of a wheelchair, of a missile launcher, and it's all done pretty clearly still. I think this is a good example of how to use multiple concepts without getting too overcrowded. For match 89, we have Chameleon Canth versus Cleaning Minister Kerezki. And besides the head of the monster, nothing is giving Chameleon about this Canth. And meanwhile, the edgy kid that still lives inside all of us loves the, like, My Chemical Romance ass, red and black vibes of Kerezki, which, at the end of the day, at least has a very full body aesthetic, so he's going to move on for me. Match 90, Noon World versus Lipstick Songstress. So, we have two different conversations going on here. First and foremost, Noon World is one of the seasons where they reuse the body and use a different head, except for this season, they also reuse the heads pretty often. Noon World specifically has two other monsters with the exact same combo of head and body as him. And Lipstick Songstress is a, like, very obvious winner, but the kind of thing that I want to touch on with her is she has a really cool color scheme. The design of the sword is, like, being the lips and just the geometric swirl throughout her whole body. It's very cool. So don't get me wrong, a lot of people would have won over Noon World in this round, but Lipstick Songstress really deserves it as well. Match 91, Nazokake Jamin versus Devil Ball. The Jamins are another one of those series where they use the same suits, but in this case, it's just different colors for the bodysuits. There's gold, silver, black, and red. And then, so basically, Jamins, the issue is their head is the only thing to go off of. And with this one, there's still not much to like. The eyes are weird. The like dot of the question mark kind of looks like a baby's pacifier. And even though Devil Ball is just baseballs times 100, it's still at least fully realized, and I can at least kind of see what the vision from top to bottom is. Match 92, Emperor Actos Gil versus Bara Mobile. Admittedly, Actos is my least favorite of the Gills family in terms of design. And listen, I really want to like Bara Mobile. He's like wacky and kind of scrungly in a way that like I want to like, because Actos isn't really doing like a ton for me. But he's really, really rough around the edges. Like, there's elements like his mustache or his weird like pseudo chest that don't really make any sense with the themes or even the rest of his design. So Actos will win, but I'm not too excited about it. Match 93. Papanian Heimel versus Boss Tauzant. Now, earlier, if you've stuck with me this long, I mentioned when it was Centipede Nezare's time that there are a lot of really well done centipede monsters. And Boss Tauzant is one of them. I think this match is also a great example of minimalism versus maximalism. Heimel has a really cool mask, and the way that his all-white costume is done is interesting enough, but that's about it. I mean, he gets some points for having not much dirt on his all-white outfit, but when you look at Boss Taozant, who is the leader of like an entire group of ninjas, all who wear like a centipede kind of logo to kind of give off that, you know, they're part of his crew. He's very cool. He has two separate designs. One is very like monstrous, one is very humanoid, but they both give Centipede 110%, and they're both just a really great example of how to do something like this correctly. For match 94, we have Doro versus SD World. I said before that a lot of the worlds are harmed by the disconnect between their head and generic body, and SD World is a great example of this. The head is kind of cartoony, the body for the worlds is pretty steampunk, and overall it's just a mess, honestly. Doro, however, is based off of a ram, and I love that there's like a good use of the traditional ram on his chest and the different like ram kind of relative horns coming out there. And there's also some references to like the Golden Fleece story from mythology, which I love. I love references. I love mythology stuff. And so Doro is very obviously the winner for me in this round. Match 95 is going to be Crush Megas versus Chimera. Chimera is a great example of a monster from Sentai that has like some inspiration, like it's supposed to be a starfish, but it's transformed into something so cool and so original that like I really haven't seen much like it before. The use of limbs and the mouth is really cool, and when compared with Crush Megas, who is a pretty standard robot, the winner is a runaway for Chimera. Match 96 is Speaker Jamin versus Thousand-Faced High Priest Chaos. Speaker Jamin is another victim of the same bodysuit problem. His mask is fine, but we also have High Priest Chaos in this match, who, besides having an amazing name, is serving Prophet, he's serving Statue of Liberty, he's serving Ten Commandments, and overall, he's a very effective, big, bad guy. So he is serving winner of this round. Match 97 is going to be Confrontation Beast Crocodile Fist Niwa versus Superglue Jamin. And we have another Jamin in this match, and honestly, he's not going to fare much better than his compatriot. I mean, Superglue, really? Especially when we already have the Glue Jamin, it just kind of feels like there's a lot of crossover that we don't need. No thanks. Niwa is really cool. A lot of the Confrontation Beasts have a kind of reference to their animal on their chest. But I really like how it's done with the crocodile being the bottom jaw here, the top jaw coming up. I think it's just really smart to do it that way. So Niwa is just going to win easily. Match 98. Hitman Mad Blast versus Excavation Ninja Mogu Drago. I don't dislike Mad Blast, but the fact that he's a catfish is only really responsible for his like giant mouth, which I am not a huge fan of. Everything else is kind of just like random alien stuff, which I don't mind, but then you have Mogu Drogo, who is like a mole and a drill and also a ninja, and not everything works about that, but he has some really interesting color choices, he has some really interesting geometry going on, and I feel like you can tell more like what he's supposed to be, so he'll get the win. Match 99. Bomb Monster versus Hijacker Nabokov. And Nabokov is another Landers monster, just like Mad Blast was. And this time he's based off of a fighter aircraft. And don't get me wrong, it's a little clunky, but I like it because it has like this The reason why it's clunky to me makes sense because it's supposed to turn into a fighter airplane, which it is able to do. And so it does kind of have that same like clunky vibe that a lot of like Transformers toys or characters have, because it's clear that this isn't like entirely what they're supposed to look like the whole time. Meanwhile, Bomb Monster is like pretty fun, pretty campy. I think this would like slay at a drag show because his head is like a grenade. He's wearing a camo uniform, but it's just not enough to beat the hijacker in this case. Unfortunately, he's going to get dropped right out of that plane and explode on the ground, leading Nabokov to be the winner. Finally, for match 100, we have the Caesar versus Tagrador. And the Caesar is a giant dinosaur with a bunch of pipes coming out of his back, which can be played via the weird flute that's on his tail. It's a cool design concept, but as is true with a lot of the monsters, it's kind of a messy design overall. I feel like there's a lot of editing that needed to be done. And Tagrador is one of two Beetle brothers, one Crimson, one Navy, but not those ones. And it's a really cool interpretation of a bruiser kind of beetle with giant fists and mandibles, and he's a really interesting looking thing, even if the concept isn't the most spectacular. Last thing I think I'll leave you with is why I think beetles are so prevalent and well done in design is because of all of the different geometry that's going on. They have the circular back, they have the like sharp horns that you can do a lot of different things with, and then they have the kind of built-in multiple arms, and there's a lot of room for experimentation. There's a lot of room for cool proportions with it all being still really readable. And that's why I think we're able to have things like Tagrador and his brother and Quagadaloid and all of these other ones that are pretty different looking from each other, but all still read as Beetle and still read as very cool. Okay, so that was match 100. We made it through part 1. I'm exhausted just like you are. And I'm very thankful for all of the viewer that will have made it this far. And we're about a 12th through round 1. As the rounds go up, it'll obviously be a lot faster every time. But I'm happy that you were able to come along with this journey with me. I've always really loved tournaments, and I really love monster design. That's one of the biggest reasons why I'm into Pokemon, why I'm into Power Rangers. And this is just a really big passion project for me. So I hope that you enjoy it as much as I do. I'm hoping anyone else with a tournamental disorder like I have will find joy in it. Or if you're like a little bit more sadistic and that's your thing, you can enjoy my slow descent into madness as I, one by one, kick 2,400 monsters off of an island. Either way, I will see you in part 2. Bye!